Two systems went against George Zimmerman that he can't understand. You guys, the media, he was like a patient in an operating table where mad scientists were committing experiments on him and he had no anesthesia. He didn't know why he was turned into this monster, but quite honestly, you guys had a lot to do with it. You just did, because you took a story that was fed to you and you ran with it, and you ran right over him. And that was horrid to him.
All right, folks, welcome to the Steve Malzberg Show, Wednesday edition. That, of course, Mark O'Mara, the lead defense attorney for George Zimmerman in his trial. And I'm happy to say we are joined once again by Mark O'Mara. Mark, thank you for taking the time. We appreciate it.
Hey, Steve. Yeah, great. Good talking to you again. How you doing?
I'm doing fine. I want to talk, first of all, what you said there and the media. You know, during the course of the trial, first of all, you're allowed to, you're not the jury. Did you watch TV during the trial at all, or you had no time?
I really had no time, so I didn't watch very much at all. I did get some of the high points from some of my staff, but I just really was getting ready for the next day every evening.
All right, even those who were in so-called Trayvon Martin's corner admitted, almost to a person with few exceptions, that, hey, this isn't going well for the prosecution, that the prosecution witnesses are really turning into defense witnesses. And then the turn from Saturday night after the verdict, Mark, the racism, how could this be? How could he not be held accountable? What's going on here? As if they were shocked. These same people who admitted there was no case here really for the prosecution, they are in attack mode, and they're still in attack mode. What do you attribute that?
Well, it's funny because I had this sort of trial hypnosis. I thought that everybody in the universe was listening to every word of the trial. It was a great trial. It was a fair trial, and the jury deliberated. They came back with the right result because it was obviously self-defense. And I really thought that now we finally got the story out. People would realize that there would be calm, there would be peace, they would accept the verdict, and we'd be done. What I didn't realize was that people who want to be angry about this case are never going to be anything angry about the case. They're not going to look at the facts. They're just going to say they had their mind made up from the 12-year-old Hollister photograph and the 275-pound Angry George photograph, and they were never going to change their minds. And unfortunately, they're going to maintain that anger for as long as they want to.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. And, it's almost one thing for the media to keep up what they're keeping up. But let me ask you, there was a word association game, only I don't want a one-word answer, that was played by Headline News. And let me start with Angela Corey. When Angela Corey was asked George Zimmerman and was asked for a word, she paused, as you well know by now. She paused for about 15, 20 seconds and then had the utter gall to say, murderer. That day that she said that, I had Alan Dershowitz, Andy McCarthy, Paul Callan, Lee Sweal. Four of them, I had five. Four of them, I revealed this to. They hadn't heard it yet. And to a person, they were outraged. What was your reaction when you heard this?
Well, my mother would have used the word peasant. She would, because that to her meant somebody who just has so little class in how they view something. I looked at that and I said, first of all, you're denigrating a jury verdict, which is completely inappropriate in our system. And by doing that, you're denigrating the entirety of the system, a system that not only are we as lawyers sworn to uphold, but that prosecutors have an additional level of obligation to maintain the faith in the system so that we can trust people to prosecute us properly. And then she comes out and says, in effect, the jury verdict was a travesty, I guess. I don't accept it. I don't believe it. He's not guilty. I still find him guilty. It was horrible. It was inappropriate. And I think that she needs to answer for having done that to the system and to my clients.
And I'm glad you asked that, because when I told Dershowitz about it, when I told Paul Callan about it, both of them right away said, especially Dershowitz, that you and George Zimmerman have a lawsuit for defamation, a strong lawsuit. Do you plan on pursuing that?
Well, I'm a criminal defense attorney. I'm not a First Amendment attorney. But, I remember from law school that you're not supposed to say something about somebody that is patently false with malice intent. And, she's a prosecutor. She knows the case. And by the way, she knew the case way in the beginning. She knew that she couldn't prove a second-degree murder case, and she knew that it was self-defense. It would seem, and even with that, she follows whatever political motivations or pressure she has and decides to, in effect, sacrifice an innocent man's freedom to some other benefits that have nothing to do with the criminal justice system. I hope somebody asks her to explain that.
Well, one more question on this, and I'll let it go. If George Zimmerman would not use you, he certainly has he discussed with you, or do you have any indication that he is interested in pursuing or might pursue a case against her for defamation?
Not a specific conversation, but he is extraordinarily frustrated with the way he has been handled in the last 16 months. And whenever I say something like that, people go, oh, but we have Trayvon Martin, who's no longer here and passed away. I'm not being insensitive to that, but look, we have to be realistic. If, in fact, George Zimmerman acted in self-defense, which the jury has now said, then why do we not give him some of that benefit and say to him that he has rights too, and that he can't be visited hatred by a prosecutor who lost the case fair and square?
Yeah. Now, the whistleblower, and we're talking to Mark O'Mara, George Zimmerman's attorney here on the Steve Malzberg Show. The fired employee, the IT guy who came forward and gave you information, cell phone records, tweets, etc., from Trayvon Martin's phone, which he took the stand and away from the jury. He was fired the day the case went to the jury. He's now filing a whistleblower lawsuit. What's your take on that?
Well, first of all, let me clear something up. He never gave us any records. He didn't give us any information at all, except to tell us that through his attorney that there may have been some information out there that we didn't get. And then we connected all the dots, but he didn't give us a report, give us a record or anything. Having said that, in January, they had those reports. That is conclusive. We got them in June. That is conclusive. That is a discovery violation of Brady proportions. Brady means a lot to a criminal defense attorney, but the Constitution requires, even without request, that they give us information which exonerates my client. This is not the first time that they hid information from us. This is the 10th time, and actually only the 10th time we know about, because in 30 years of practice, I have never filed a motion for sanctions against a prosecutor for discovery violation. I filed 6 in this case. It's an absurdity.
So is it incumbent upon you to file for these sanctions against the prosecution, and have you or will you?
We have a motion pending. The judge, if you might recall, deferred it until after the trial. At the point where I called Bernie De Leon to the stand, the judge decided not to allow me to do that at that point. So we have a motion pending. It's going to be amended, and it's going to be set for hearing. All
right. Let me move on to Eric Holder. Eric Holder came out and said, among other things, in front of a crowd at a sorority crowd of, I believe, very prominent black women, that I know you're troubled by the verdict. I'm troubled by the verdict. He talked yesterday about stand your ground laws, which I don't think had anything to do with this case whatsoever. And there were reports, and Mark, they appear to be very legitimate reports, that the Department of Justice held a conference call with civil rights groups and people who have an axe to grind here, saying, hey, they even set up an email, reportedly, if you have anything on George Zimmerman, if you have anything to help us bring civil rights charges against George Zimmerman, give it to us. What the heck is going on in this country?
Look, he is the Attorney General of the United States. Just like the prosecutor, he has an obligation to respect a well-founded jury's decision in this case. And they denigrate the process and therefore the system when they placate people for political motivations. The Justice Department, through the FBI, did an investigation starting in, I think it was May of 2012. They interviewed over 40 people, and to a letter, they found not only no racism in George's heart or blood, but they found non-racism. They found people who said, George is meek, mild, easygoing. He's the guy who went to Sanford to complain about the beating of Sherman Ware, a black homeless guy, by the white cop's son, which is now well known. He's the guy who was mentoring 2 black children. He's the guy who, from 6 to 12 years of age, 2 black children lived with him and his family while the mom was going to work every day. And he's the guy who took a black girl to prom. So I think what they're doing is trying to placate the anger that's out there by saying, yes, they're going to do an investigation. they know they're not going to find anything because the FBI did everything they could to find it before and never did.
All right, so Mark, how likely, you could use a scale of 1 to 10 or give me your own words, how likely is it that you believe either George Zimmerman will have additional charges filed against him by justice?
A 1, and it's a 1 rather than 0 because in the absurdity that has been this case, if you had asked me that question 16 months ago, will he ever been charged with second-degree murder, I would have said, well, I guess it's a 1 because those charges never should have been filed and federal charges never should be filed.
One more. Jesse Jackson says Emmett Till, Medgar Evers, Trayvon Martin, they're all the same. Tavis Smiley says black babies are being shot dead in the streets. The Washington Post does a whole story about echoes of the past with the Zimmerman acquittal by a Southern jury, quote unquote. You don't have to convince me there's no race here, but what's the motivation of the people that are doing this, do you believe?
I believe that they're trying to put a square peg into a round hole to try and resurrect some capital for an ongoing civil rights movement. And then look, I've represented young black males for the entirety of my career, and I'm okay with wanting to have a conversation about how that's happening and some inequities in the system. It's just that George Zimmerman is not the guy for it. He's not the case for it. Get your cost shares off my clients, and then we'll have a conversation.
All right, listen, Mark, I know you got to go. Thank you so much for your time, sir, really, and congratulations on while your heart breaks for the Martin family, I know, but I loved when you said you're always. So what'd you say? The jury, you fancy that when you speak, the whole world is just amazed, or why? What did you say? What was that you said?
No, somebody asked me what the best time. That's my best point to the trial. I said, look, I'm a trial attorney. I think every time I open my mouth, it's the best point to the trial.
There you go.
That's just trial hypnosis.
All right, Mark, thank you.
All right. Great
Take
talking
care.
to you again.